Well, a very pleasant good morning to our members, to our partners and friends. Thank you so much for joining us for this month's webinar as we discuss the theme, the psychology of AI in business, how artificial intelligence is changing business and human behavior. I'm Dr. Lynette Holder, CEO of the SBA, and it's my pleasure to moderate this session today. Now, many of you, I'm sure, on the call are very familiar with our online platform, but for those who may be new today, please know that our session is recorded, and immediately after this, you'll be able to go on our YouTube channel as well as on our website at SBA TV, and you can watch this session in the event that you miss any aspects of it. So fear not. At the end of the session, we'll ask you to stay on for an extra 5 minutes to complete a very short evaluation tool. This is going to help in our review of the session and also help in our planning for the rest of the year and other sessions to come. We value your feedback, we value your input, and therefore we ask you to please share your thoughts with us at the end of this webinar today. It is a bright and sunny day in Barbados and the Eastern Caribbean. And what better time to pause to reflect on generative AI and how it is affecting business and how it is affecting human behavior. Now, I'm not so sure if you've seen a recent report from Sweden that indicates that particular country has now resolved to revert in their school system to using books and using the old-fashioned way of calculating things and going back, as it would indicate to us, to the former days when we had very manual systems. In other words, they've done the research, they've seen the impact of the technology on students, on young people, and so they've made a decision to go back to using the manual way of doing things. Will that take on some legs across Europe and the rest of the world? Well, we'll wait and see. But for sure, lots of research is being done on the impact of generative AI, especially on cognition, especially on our ability to think and use our mind, use our brains. They've already said to us that, the average person uses what, about 15, 20% of their brain power. I'm sure Professor Devonish will correct me if the number is wrong. But given the fact that we're already not using a lot of our brains, with the reliance on AI, the data is saying that we are actually losing cognition. So this is a good time, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues all, for us to pause and have this discussion today on how AI is changing behavior in business and for us generally as individuals. So, without any further ado, then let's get into our discussion this morning. I'll remind you, please jot your notes down because at the end of the PowerPoint presentation, we will have a short question and answer segment with our subject matter expert this morning. Professor Dwayne Devonish, no stranger to the SBA, is a professor of management and organizational behavior at the University of the West Indies Cave Hill campus. A former Commonwealth scholar, he is a prolific researcher and lead consultant who has spearheaded the development of several national policies in Barbados. And with over 20 years of experience, he provides technical expertise in research methodology and statistical analysis to international and regional bodies alike, such as the International Labour Organization, UNICEF, and various governments across the Caribbean. And most recently, Professor Devonish served as the lead researcher for the state of the small business sector in Barbados. This is a body of research that was done here on island to give us qualitative and quantitative information on the micro, small, and medium enterprise sector in Barbados. It's a landmark national study commissioned, yes, by the SBA and funded by the Inter-American Development Bank. And if you have not yet read it, if you've not had sight of this information, I invite you to visit our website, www.sba.bb. In the article section, and you'll see the research there on the state of small business in Barbados 2026. So, no stranger to the platform. Professor, welcome. And I hope that you are having a good day so far. I'm not sure which country you're in, but wherever you are at this time, hey, we're able to have this session because of technology. So, indeed, interesting that we're talking now about the psychology of generative AI. And over to you to share your thoughts with us on this critical topic at this time. Good morning and welcome.
Good morning, Dr. Holder, and good morning to all participants. Let me express my gratitude to you and the SBA community for extending this invitation to deliver a presentation on a subject about which I'm deeply passionate. And I must say that I was following some of your backgrounding on the AI phenomenon in Switzerland, and I was caught off guard when I read read those news reports coming out from social media on Switzerland, pretty much reversing, putting the brakes on AI and reversing, going back to some of the manual and traditional processes, especially within the classroom environment. And I'm thinking, because when you look at the kinds of risks that we're seeing now, especially, I mean, I'm hailing from the University of West Indies in academia, the kinds of ethical risks that we are now navigating, especially things like ownership and integrity. And you're doing a PhD, for example, or MPhil program at the university, and you're using AI to generate most of the text. There's little room now for human invention, and I'm hoping that we as a country, we can, I wouldn't say learn from Switzerland in a sense, because I understand the response or the reaction perhaps, but I think if you think about the jobs that are now currently in place, more than 90% of those jobs require digital skills. And even from our survey, if you remember, and for those who are in the room, if you're able to access the online report that was put on the website on the SBA's facility, you'll see that one key finding that emanated was that less than 1 in 5 employers are actually using AI or adopting or integrating AI in Barbados. And so that's something that we have to consider moving forward. That should the response be reverting, going back to the traditional, or finding a way that we can navigate something that to me is unstoppable, like the internet. When the internet came out, people were saying that, this is not going to fly, this is not going to work. And here it is. Same was said for social media. And now we are still living with it. So I think this is a good prelude into my presentation. And I wanted to characterize this presentation in a way that doesn't look at the traditional conversation on AI in terms of how AI is used for particular ways, for particular avenues for business growth and development. I wanted to add a bit of human behavior element or psychology to it. So I was happy that the SPA had reached out to me and tell me, we really want to look at something on the psychology of AI and the impact that AI is having on human behavior and learning, especially within the business setting. And of course, this would apply across all business settings, from academia to even novel workplaces. Okay, so 3 objectives I want to achieve by the end of this presentation. And the first one is for all of you to understand the growing role of artificial intelligence, especially in the modern day organization, whether it is a micro, small, medium, large organization, there is a role that AI plays. And I want to be able to communicate that well, and how that particular role helps transform the work processes, the decision making, the business performance, and decisions related to the same, and how business owners can leverage the knowledge of AI in responsible ways. And I think AI, like any resource, has to be used responsibly. I mean, if you think about it, money is a resource, and we know that we have to use that money responsibly. We know that that technology and other inputs are key resources that go into our business processes and our business decision making, and they too have, of course, a special place in terms of that accountability framework that we operate all within as business owners. And I think AI should be no different. The second, I think this is a core substantive part of the presentation, would be looking at the psychological and behavioral impacts of AI. And I want to look at it on the premise that business owners are going to be using AI, but employees of the said businesses are going to be asked, or some in many cases directed, to use AI. And clearly, there will be psychological and behavioral impacts that are oftentimes unnoticed. They're very subtle, but they do have tremendous impacts. I want to talk about things like motivation, for example, trust, creativity, well-being, very important subject, job security, and even workplace relationships. So we'll tackle some of those things in this presentation. But I wanted this presentation to be practical. So this is not going to be an academic lecture. You'll find that I think the large part of the presentation, coming into the end of the presentation, I have in store for all of you some practical strategies for using AI responsibly and ethically, but optimally. And that's key, because you want to be able to optimize this powerful resource, but do so in responsible, ethical ways. So how do you kind of balance that tightrope? And that's exactly what those practical strategies I'm going to offer would lend. Okay. So let's first get into what is AI, because I mean we're seeing so many articles now on AI, what it is and what it isn't, and people are saying, but this is not AI. This is something totally different. This is machine learning and so on. So I want to get rid of a lot of those misconceptions with some definitions, clear definitions. Now, if you think about the concept of artificial intelligence, it has a simple definition. It represents any computer or artificial system that can perform activities that normally would require human intelligence. It's almost a kind of an assistant or tool that supports, and in some cases supplants, human intelligence, or in this case, the human footprint. Now, if you think about it, artificial intelligence probably was from a kind of a first phase. If you divide it into several phases, the first wave of artificial intelligence actually had begun in the 1950s. And I think many of you may have heard about the Turing computer. This was developed by Alan Turing during the war to try to determine what Germans were doing. They were working on behalf of the British. This was a team that Turing was leading. And he was able to kind of use computer technology at the time. Very primitive in our modern day language, but in those days it was technology of the highest order, and he was able to use that to decipher codes for the German to kind of penetrate German forces. And over from the 1950s, as you imagine, that there were evolutionary changes in the way AI was actually applied. In fact, early stage AI was focused on analyzing data and not generating content as what's happening now. It was typically used for recognizing patterns, sometimes providing analysis on particular types of data that was fed into the system. And you'll find that somewhere in the late 90s and then going into early 2000s, there was this movement to something called machine learning. And because before that, machines could not demonstrate or what I would say resemble human learning algorithms. So for example, machines at that time were simply just feeding information, getting fed information, and spitting out outputs. But they were not taking information and learning and developing on that information. So when machine learning technology came in, it was such a groundbreaking intervention in the field of technology, and it moved very nicely into in the mid, I would say, 2010 into 2014. We had then the emergence of generative AI. Now, and here's where the distinction came. Generative AI was that AI or pool of AI systems that could create new content first ever. So you didn't have this in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. You had now this particular AI technology that could learn from what was known as a training set or data set. So these programs actually were fed, I mean, tons and sea of data across the internet, and they learned in terms of patterns and linguistic symbolic elements in the sense of how to string together text, for example. And it led to even the formation of a subset of generative AI known as large language models or LLMs. So large language models represent a subset of generative AI that can actually generate text. So like the chat GPT that we're familiar with, right, or the Claude, those are particular AI tools that are known as LLMs or large language models, a format of generative AI. So we've seen that generative AI has really taken over academia and the business sector. And I want to show you, for example, some of the categories of generative AI. So if you're wondering how this is broken down, because I mean, there's so much out there, you can think about 5 general models. So you have the LLMs, as I spoke to, the chat GPTs, the Claudes. I think those are, we're a lot more familiar with those ones. The Copilot, the Microsoft Copilot. But then there are the image generation models. So for those who are in graphic design, where you probably might remember Canva, for example. Now, Canva carries a particular facility to allow for AI integration. And outside of that, there are competing AI systems where they can generate all of the graphic work for you without a human graphic artist in the room. Now, I know people start saying, wow, this is powerful. I mean, I can use this and I don't have to pay a graphic artist, but then it has implications for those who've already trained in that area. We'll talk a little bit about that. So Midjourney, Adobe Firefly, these are some of the more innovative and impactful ones. We also have the video generation models. So these are AI tools that generate videos. So let's say SPA wants to do a video ad, but they don't want the stress or the cost of paying someone like a team of actors, a director to generate a video or influencer. They can generate video, and I think this is something that is going to be, but it is currently posing some threats to a lot of creatives in the Hollywood. You will hear about Hollywood. The actors now are saying, well, how could you take AI now and reconfigure and create an AI model of my face, even though, and then they use that as backgrounds or extras in movies. And it says, I guess the directors and the producers a lot of money. So you can see that it is going to cause some problems, but there are benefits and there are threats that we'll get into. So you have the audio and speech models, which I find very useful. And as an academic and a lecturer at university, we've come across, for example, persons with disabilities, visual, auditory disabilities, hard of hearing, and those who are deaf, who actually rely on some of these particular models. And I think they're making a big dent in how we really deliver education to persons with those disabilities. And of course, code generation. So now you have AI that generates codes. So I know once you go and train Java and some other what we call traditional coding languages, a lot of the AI can do it now within seconds. So again, you can see exactly where we're heading in that particular vein. Now, I actually done some research, and people would ask me, but Devonish, can you point to me a company that's using AI and they're using it well? Well, based on my research, I can tell you that there are 5 companies. And of course, these companies are all extra Caribbean. They're outside of the Caribbean. Most of them are US-based companies. But from Microsoft, some of these companies use, and of course, are developers of the same AI. Microsoft, in fact, if you check the Microsoft organization itself, the employees, they actually use Copilot. So they don't only sell you these types of tools, they use them in their day-to-day operations. So they're fully integrated across their particular process landscape. So from customer queries, dealing with digital marketing communications, JP Morgan and Chase, that's a popular financial institutions, they use ChatGPT and a few other internal LLMs. These are the text-based ones. And that's because they do a lot of investment research. So imagine things that used to take days and weeks, Dr. Holder and others can take a matter of minutes to get this information. I'm a business owner and I want to find out what my market needs. And I can ask the AI to generate this information with a click or prompt. And we'll talk a little bit about how we do that. Morgan Stanley use a lot of their processes. They leverage and integrate a lot of the AI in their processes. And of course, it'll be accruing a number of benefits. Amazon, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Amazon Q, but that's an AI tool that is actually assisting the employees at Amazon now with things like coding and customer support. So if you remember, if you've ever gone to Amazon, sometimes you have like a customer agent. You know, we normally would have the chat box. That chat box opens, and a lot of it is AI generated. I know we always had chat bots, but remember the chat bots that we were interacting with previous to the AI, the generative AI emergence, were chatbots that were based on different algorithms. All right. And something to note, I think that separates AI from other technologies because I think we get confused. Now, I'll give you a perfect example. You're all familiar with Excel, right? Microsoft Excel. So you can generate analyses with Excel, you can import data, you can automate. But those types of programs use a different, what we call deterministic code or coding language to generate them. All right. So the AI uses something called a probabilistic algorithm. Now, what that means is that it generates these images and text based on known statistical probabilities. So when an AI speaks to you, so let's say you say hello, and we talk about the AI. We say hello, how are you doing? I want to find out something about SVA, how many members they have, and the AI talk. What the AI is actually doing is predictive texting, right? Based on the data set, based on what your prompt is. So in a way, it's learning from the training data set, but the more you prompt, the more it's building its data set. So, for example, one of the things I usually would do, let's say if I'm interfacing with ChatGPT, I would ask ChatGPT to generate something for me, and I would say, "Well, this is not good. Can you do this? Can you add this?" And I would tell ChatGPT, "Save this in your system, so that when I come back, and you'll be surprised, you come back in the next few weeks, and it would say, oh, I remember what you said." So that's because it's building based on those probabilistic laws. Okay. Now the problem is that because those types of AIs, well, pretty much the AI family relies on what is known as statistical probabilities. There is always the risk that AI produces something called hallucination, and a hallucination is something that is a completely fabricated output. So, for example, you ask AI, so can you tell me what the current GDP for Barbados or for last year? And it spits out a number. And the number is completely inaccurate. In fact, it pulls it from something totally different. And that is because, remember, the AI is learning from a training data set. And it is only, and I always say that the AI is only as good as the training data set, the data set that it actually learned from, right? And I think about it, it applies from a human analog the same way. If I was at a university and I was learning about a particular program for 3 years, but not knowing that the lecturers who were teaching me didn't have a clue. So I'm assuming that all of what I'm getting is factual information. I go there as a doctor and say, well, so, and people are saying, but what is he talking? But I could only be as good as the input. So it works the same way in the machine world. So that's why, as the training data sets are evolving, we have to be careful because, as you know, more and more misinformation is going to leak into those training data sets, and the AI can only parrot what is taught. So these are some of the, I think, the companies that you can kind of go and learn a bit on their integration, the AI integration. I think if you go to their websites, there are reports that they mention how AI has integrated their strategic reports, and they're available online. Now, I want to talk about now the section of this presentation that I think everybody sometimes would get quite antsy about, and that is, so what are the jobs that are going to be least and most affected by this AI wave, especially the current wave that we're facing, the generative AI wave. Now, one of the things I did was to kind of work around some of what the research was telling me in terms of those jobs that are the highest, what we call high impact, medium impact, and low impact. So if you think about categorizing those jobs, and I'm just going to give you a definition here. So high impact here means those jobs that have the highest risk of supplanting or being supplanted or being replaced or impacted in some way by AI. And these tend to be what we call the repetitive, predictable, rule-based tasks, like the administrative, clerical work. And that's because in those types of jobs, you'll find that there's limited human judgment required. And as a result, the technology can kind of supplant a lot of the other processes that are in place. Now, the medium impact jobs are the ones that are a little bit more sophisticated, high skill, but because of the reliance on analysis and coding, things that AI can actually do, the more modern forms of AI, you find that you would have an impact or the jobs that you're occupying would definitely be impacted in some way. Not necessarily completely removing the human element, but it would call for a lot of upskilling of humans, being able to navigate the AI technology outside of the technical skills that are required. And then there are what we call the low impact jobs, the jobs that are least likely to be affected, especially within this current wave of the AI technology. And these are jobs that speak more to what I consider to be the soft skills. As my grandmother would say, soft skills are the hardest skills to learn. And I think AI has not reached that stage, I think. Even though we may have conversations with it, you could actually sit down and have a nice conversation, and AI can tell you how it feels about you and all types of things. But all of these things are what I consider to be artificially performative in nature. So they're not really true. It's almost if I'm talking to a young lady who has no interest in me, but she's WhatsApping me just to kind of satisfy interest, but she just doesn't want to say, I don't really want to talk to you. So it's really AI just kind of appealing to your prompts because it can do no better. So these types of jobs would be jobs that require empathy, leadership, trust, the physical dexterity jobs, the manual lifting jobs and so on, the manufacturing and so on, and complex judgment jobs. So I'll give you an idea of what those jobs look like. And by the way, I'll share this presentation through the SBA so they can put it up for you. But this is an interesting convergence here. So you can see the high impact jobs. So I know some of you are looking at your jobs to see if it's somewhere in there. So you have the data entry clerks, you have administrative assistants. These are the high impact jobs. The telemarketers, basic customer service agents. Right now, I had a colleague who called me and told me he was called for a job interview because he made an application. I think it's this somewhere in the US, and he was on this phone. And he was talking to this agent. Sound just human, but an AI crafted agent. Believe it. And this agent, so, I mean, when he's like, let's say he stammered, the agent would say, "Okay, take your time," and just like a human. I mean, these things are very much mimicking, based on the technology, human beings to a large extent. And I mean, it is scary sometimes. Now, the medium impact, those medium impact jobs, you will believe things like the accountants and the lawyers, financial analysts. Now, you might be saying, but accountants, how is that medium impact? Now, if you think about it, there's a lot of work that accountants do that are basic and clerical. I mean, like, you put it together, let's say a balance sheet, you try to do some basic accounting analysis, or probably, let's say, you're planning payroll. You have AI systems. If you go back to some of the organizations that I listed, like the same Amazon, they have AI tools generating payroll and those types of things. So it's not to say that, as I said, in the medium impact jobs, that those jobs are going to be completely supplanted in terms of the human, completely supplanted. But those jobs are going to require now accountants, the lawyers, those professionals to be upskilled in the use of AI in their role. Is almost, if you think about it, an employer who's interviewing two job candidates, and they're in accounting. One accountant is versed in AI integration in accounts, but they know the AI, they have the qualifications and so on. And you just have what we call the traditional accountant. An employer is more likely to go to that accountant, the first one, because not only does he or she carry the technical skills, but they have the additional benefit of knowing how to use the AI in their professional work. And of course, the low impact, we still are saying that psychologists and nurses, the healthcare workers, doctors. I mean, many can argue that, I mean, the AI technology is moving in that direction. But I think the last news story that I read, there was a story where they're saying that this AI robotic device was able to conduct surgery on a grape, a grape. So we haven't reached that stage where they're conducting surgical operations on human beings. We know that there are robotics that do so, but not the AI-driven ones as yet. So these are pretty much safe for now within this revolution. Okay, so I want to get now into the core business of this presentation, which this is about discussing the impacts of AI on the human learning and, of course, on human behavior in the organizations. And I want to profile the fact that I think we've already established that AI is a powerful tool and resource for organizations. It does not matter the scale. And we've seen it in research from the McKinsey and Company. That's a company that does research on different types of technologies, the PwC. There was two reports that came out independently from these two organizations that pretty much documented how AI can be used to improve productivity gains, to reduce costs, and so on. Now, I think one of the pathways to productivity is, I think, something that I think is less understood here in the Caribbean, is how AI can work on those particular tasks that we consider to be quite operational and sometimes menial, right? And I think there affords employees and managers greater space and time to actually engage in what I consider to be the more strategic decisions. Sometimes you're caught up as an HR manager, out in fires, writing a letter, a job letter, or writing a letter for someone to termination, or some kind of training development assessment. And if you can have an AI that can kind of navigate in that space, it frees up a lot of time for those professionals to really be strategic, to do the things that really matter, that requires the human intellect to apply for the organization. So we can see that there are benefits in that way. Better decision making, and I'll put a caveat on that soon. But AI can analyze a large amount of information much faster than humans, I must tell you. Sometimes I've seen colleagues tell me that they've uploaded full reports, these 100-page reports. For example, a budget report that comes out from a government's reporting, let's say annual cycle for the country, and you cannot understand this budget, and you upload it into the system. It pulls out all of the summary points, and you can tell it, I want you to speak to me as if I were a 80-year-old grandmother who was educated at secondary school level. And it does exactly that. It knows exactly how to adjust the language. So we can see the value in that in terms of how it leads to better decision making. But the caveat I would place here is that, remember, AI is based on probabilistic rules. So it means that a lot of the outputs we still have to verify, we have to fact check, we have to vet. And we'll talk about how we go about doing that later. It does, I think, do a great job in identifying trends and risks and opportunities. One of the things I do, like if I'm doing research, because I'm one of those old school researchers who will go and look for data and so on. One of the things I do to test AI is let's say, for example, I said, well, AI, I want you to find me 3 articles on, let's say, the impact of technology on business in Barbados. It would give me this, let's say, give me 3 articles. I said, no, stop there. I want you, for every article you give me a URL link so I can check it for myself. I don't want you to give me this information. So you can set parameters. See, I said, no problem. I'm not gonna spit it out for you. I'm gonna give you the link. And in more cases, 9 out of 10, it would give you a link that actually works. Now, the 1 out of 10, when you click on a link and it does not open, you will know that this is part of the hallucination bias that we spoke about. And that's why I would always say, even before AI, if you think about it, when somebody comes to you with information, we as human beings, we take on a skeptical role of assessing and vetting and not taking something at face value. And I don't think that we should abandon that human attribute of being skeptical when we receive information from any source. Doesn't matter. Because if I search on Google, it's the same way. If I go on Google and I search, I would do the necessary due diligence to ensure that information I receive is factual and is reflective of the truth. All right. So I think you're more attentive in the case of AI. All right. One of the other benefits I've come across with the AI technology in the area of business, especially in the front-facing jobs, there's an improved customer service experience. I'll be frank. I know that there were complaints that, I mean, in the first iteration of AI, where you would have, and technology even before the generative AI, where you would call a business and you would get like a automated voice, hello, please, and call, and you'd have to press 3, and then you get upset because you want to speak to a human being. You'll be surprised, especially when you look at places like Canada and the US and even in countries in Europe, some countries in Africa, that their AI agents are so human-like that you'll be talking and be saying, no problem, we'll get somebody for you. And if you want a real agent, they wouldn't, dilly-dally, they will get you to a real agent if you wish. And it tells you the movement, the evolution of technology over time. All right. And you see that 24-hour customer support? That's powerful. I was happy to learn, for example, that we have a helpline, a psychological mental health helpline for those who are going through mental health challenges that you can call. If you remember, it was being advertised on the radio recently. where you can call and get speak to a psychologist and so on. And they're they boast that is a 24-hour hotline. And I'm wondering what when you think about changes going forward in terms of AI technology and telemedicine and so on, if AI has a place. Now, I must put a big qualifier here because you've probably seen reports where people have used AI to get mental health support and it did not end well. No, 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 it did not end well. And you had a situation where I think it was a young gentleman who committed suicide recently in the US. He was getting apparently some advice from ChatGPT. Now, I'm not sure the extent to which ChatGPT led to that directly, but I imagine that the news reports they connected the two things: the suicide event, and of course the fact that he had a prior interaction, very recent, before his departure with the AI technology, and they had all the evidence. So you can see that there are pros and cons in how you navigate this, especially when you're dealing with such sensitive subjects like mental health. Okay. And of course, we spoke about cost savings. So these are kind of a sample of the benefits that you can actually um, gain from the use of AI. But I want to get into the psychology though, because as human beings, we are beyond body. We have a mind, and that mind can be affected based on how we use technology. And I want to get into several things here. How is AI changing how people are working, how employees feel about their jobs, how decisions are made, and how people are now interacting with each other? Now, and of course, the last ball in the room, how people perceive their value in the workplace. Because here you have a technology that you might, before, well, you still probably having it. You will have a John or Michael that you're trying to compete for promotion. So you're trying to outshine Michael in the same department. Now you have to outshine an AI assistant. And sometimes, it is a kind of a disproportionate battle there. But I want to kind of go back to something that's very important. That, as you know, technology is relative because the technology that we had in the 1800s, in the 19th century, at that time was the new technology we did, and people were scared equally. When we moved from the steam engines to the powered trains and so on, and we moved from even typewriters to computers. There was always that kind of anxiety that human beings confronted. And I don't think it's going to be any different here in this transition. I always think that we have to learn from the lessons of the past to understand how we navigate this field of technology. It doesn't matter, you could put any label on it. AI, IA, it's going to be the same way that people react to these types of changes. And I can give you a perfect example that was my grandmother told me about here in Barbados. I was in primary school, but I think for those who are old enough would remember when, especially if you were in the clerical space, when there was a move, and this was in the government sector, to move from typewriters to computers, and how painful that move was. And I remember at the time, well, not I remember, but the story went from my grandmother's recollection was that people were quite anxious. You say, what was this computer? They didn't know what a computer was. You think about it, you were accustomed to a device like a typewriter, you type, and you were trained in those days. A stenographer clerk, you had to be trained, you had to get your qualifications in this typewriting activity or skill area. And here you had this new thing, and people were saying, so people were, they were confronting change. And I always say that the only constant we have is change. And you know what the trade unions had to do? They had to, they held back and they told government, we have to do training. We have to do this gradually. And I think that was one of the lessons that we've forgotten in the Caribbean. How, it's so important to listen to stakeholders and to be able to give employees that hand holding in this process. That you don't have to foist it on them immediately or in any forcible way, but to recognize that they have to build trust in the system. And building trust means that you have to provide the avenues for training, provide the avenues for ventilation, allow people to ventilate how they feel about this and whether they feel that, that they should segue. And I remember what had happened from the recollection is that there were some departments that had typewriters and some had computers, and then over time, and then because you had your friend had a computer, you start navigating nicely. And as you develop your skill set, you became more and more comfortable with those particular devices. And now everybody's pretty much, if you think about it, more than 99% of those in front-facing jobs are using computers now. And I think we can achieve the same feat if we apply, again, the lessons that we've learned in the past when it came to technological changes. Okay, so I want to get into now some of the psychological impacts that I've researched, not necessarily in the Caribbean, but research I've taken from other countries. I'm yet to do a real study on the psychological impact of AI in Barbados. But these particular impacts came from studies across the globe, including Africa, countries in Africa. So one of the I'm going to talk about the positive impacts that we are seeing psychologically, the reduced stress from routine work. One of the things that I think we can all agree that there are certain types of jobs and tasks that are monotonous, they are rife in boredom, and they can create a lot of stress. There's actually research that shows that repetitive, monotonous type jobs are as stressful as jobs that are complex and ambiguous. Believe it or not, there's almost two sides of the spectrum, and they can create equal amounts of stress in employees. Now, imagine using AI to remove a lot of that repetition from the human agent. The human agent now is allowed to do a lot more higher value activity, a lot more cognitive um, tasks and activities, cognitive driven tasks and activities. So there's less cognitive overload, there's less task fatigue. And some of the employees are actually reporting that this, especially if AI is used, as I said, as a low skill replacement or low skill activity support tool, you find a lot of those benefits accruing. Now, the other thing that we've been finding um, is the fact that AI has increased confidence in many of the employees across the professional sphere. If you think about ever going into a job for the first time, and as people say, there's some jobs you have to hit the ground running. There's some managers who would tell you, no, we're not here about any onboarding or orientation. They wouldn't tell you that directly, but they would expect that as soon as you get your degree, you go in that workplace, you start working as if you were there for 10 years. And people say this is unfair. Now, with AI, I see that there's a change, especially there was a study in Australia where a lot of entry level jobs or entrants going into the entry level jobs we're using AI to kind of help support their onboarding process and getting familiar with the tasks. Because they may have the qualifications, but because they are each organization, as you know, each environment requires a different skill set that they can't teach you in academia. That transfer learning is difficult in those days. But now with AI, people are using AI as thinking partners to get information very quickly. Employees can gain access to information insights very, very quickly. And this when it comes to decision making, you have this. If you think about AI as a cooperating tool, so you have ideas, you search, you have your research, but you may want the AI to kind of vet it a little bit more. And it's okay because you can use that as it's almost if I bounce some ideas on Dr. Holder, call Dr. Holder, Dr. Holder, an idea, I need to bounce this on you. And we have this conversation. And AI is actually doing that quite competently, interestingly. Um, Now, creativity. Now, many argue that AI is not a creative being. It's not creative. All it does is spit out information that is learned. But if you think about it, and I could be very philosophical here. Any human being, all human beings are creative. We create stuff, but you don't necessarily create things out of a vacuum. I mean, for example, when I came to develop, I've actually developed a guide for academia at university called "How to Write Using AI Responsibly and Ethically." I can actually share that guide with you at some point.
I can't play. Let them blow up some of the
Hi.
song.
Oh, we have someone who's
They can't play. Two rules. See, is either the color to the color. Is either
we
right.
want your business out there, especially with AI listening.
Yes.
Yes.
They have that muted. Go right ahead.
Yes, no problem. So what I was going to the point about creativity and how that creativity is, yes, it is a human device. It is something that we from birth we write books and we write articles and so on. But if you think about it, we don't do that in a blank slate. A lot of the creativity, all creativity comes from inputs from somewhere, some experience. So you see the person who writes the book about how to navigate AI, for example, had some experience, whether it was reading or living that experience. And if you think about it, AI has that same kind of capacity, but not to the obviously true, authentic human being, right? Not comparable to. But if you think about it, with the training data sets that AI is learning, those training data sets didn't drop out the sky. those training data sets were developed by the same human inputs that have been feeding creativity for centuries, for hundreds of thousands of years. And I'm saying to people that, I know we like to kind of, from a reductionist standpoint, we say, this is just a tool. It can't do that. I mean, and at this stage, it cannot, but it will continue to grow. And as I said, I'm not saying that it would reach the level that human beings have reached in our evolutionary cycle, where we are now as Homo sapiens. But, and I'm not getting into the conversation, but whether it's going to be conscious and all that, I don't really believe that. But in terms of what it can do, specifically generating ideas, putting together new thoughts, and so on, it's really exactly many of the activities that we do as human beings pretty much parallel a lot of what the AI actually does. All right. Supporting innovation and problem solving. And of course, encouraging experimentation and learning. One of the things a lot of people don't recognize is you can use AI in a way that it doesn't have to, you don't have to feel that you're using AI as an outsource to your skill or to your thinking, because I think that's what's happening. A lot of people are outsourcing their critical thinking to the AI. So AI is doing all the critical thinking for us. And it does not have to be that way. One of the things that you can do, and I've actually started doing it, I'm actually speaking to some of even my relatives and my students, when you're talking to, let's say, ChatGPT, you can actually set parameters through your prompts. You can tell, I don't want you to give me the answer. Let's say you want to write a letter. And I was talking to a family member who wanted to write a CV, but they wanted to use the AI to write the CV. I said, but it'd be good to learn how to write the CV yourself. What you can do is that you can perhaps ask the AI, I'm looking to write a CV, and you set parameters like this. You say, don't produce the CV for me. I want you to tell me what, if I were talking to you, Dwayne Devonish, for example, or talking to you, Charmaine, or talking to you, Dr. Hall, I would ask you like a mentor, but how do I go? You would say, well, you have these sections, and you can let the AI work in the same way as if you were talking to someone, but not building the CV. And you can have a separate document open, and you're writing, you're typing, but you're getting information. Now, what this does is that it retains the learning mechanism. So it means that learning process is still very much active. Okay. So there are ways in which you can actually use the AI very smartly and much more optimally than other types of tools. So AI has been an important resource when it comes to increasing productivity. We know that employees can complete tasks much more quickly. We know there's improved time management. There's increased learning, but a caveat here, it has to be anchored by how you interface with the AI. Are you interfacing with the AI simply to generate reports? And you don't even read the reports, you just copy and paste them and put them over in your Word document and submit them. Or are you asking, I want you to be my assistant. You actually put those parameters in place. Do not produce this report for me. I want you to answer my questions. So, you might say, how do I sequence this report? It might give you some ideas, and you may go with them, you may not go with them. And then you can let the AI, vet it. Tell me what you feel about this. And if you think about it, that's no different from if I were, again, students would come to me and say, Devonish, I've done some analysis of statistical analysis. Am I going the right direction? And I would say, no, I'm not going to give you the analysis. I'm not going to do it for you. But I'll sit down with you and show you what this means. This predictive value means that this is a t-statistic. And this means that this is statistically significant. Now think about that. That's the AI teaching you in our parallel way. And if you can train it like that, you can have the kind of benefits that you normally would obtain if you were engaging with a human agent. Okay. Now, interestingly, one of the other findings I came across from research in the US from a study on the importance of AI, especially for human behavior, or the value it offers, is that employees have been reporting that they collaborate with AI and with colleagues more effectively given the training that they receive. So there's a big caveat there. This enhanced collaboration only happens with well-targeted training, well-designed, executed, targeted training in the use of AI. Because when you give someone a tool that they're ill-equipped to use, you know what happens. And the same goes with AI. So you have to be able, if you're integrating, what part of your integration strategies, AI integration strategies, business owners or employees, is to ensure that those who are going to be interfacing with the tool are trained, even if in the basics of the tool, all right? And innovation. You do get a lot of innovation coming out of AI in terms of beautiful ideas. Perhaps you might have a table and AI tells you, there's a better way if you can restructure the table for bigger impact. And you work with that. And here's the thing. When AI teaches you that, if you're doing it correctly, if you're interfacing with the AI correctly, you might not have to go back to AI to generate that same table because you can use it as a template, you can modify it, and that's where human agency still trumps. All right, very important. Now, I spoke a lot of positive psychological impacts as if I had shares in AI technology, but I don't. So I want to keep this balance. And I want to talk about the darker side of AI, the negative psychological impacts that we've come across. Now, I think this is no surprise that, we have been bombarded by news reports, by stories, anecdotes of people across the world talking about the anxiety and fears surrounding AI and how AI has the prospective of replacing them in their particular jobs or their roles. So that worry is real. It doesn't mean that the thing that you're worrying about is going to be real, but the worry is real. So it means that it has to be attended to. So we know that AI and its emergence, and I think perhaps how it's being promoted and marketed, is creating anxiety, is creating uncertainty for both employers and employees. And of course, as you know, that would naturally affect morale and trust. We'll talk a little bit on trust as we go forward. The next psychological impact that is adverse in nature is the loss of control. I'll be honest with this one. This is one that we've encountered in academia. Imagine, think about it. Imagine that you're a lecturer or teacher in secondary school, tertiary education. You're teaching your students, you're telling them to write their essays and so on. And you're realizing that your students now are using AI in ways that are sometimes supplanting human agency. But then you have to mark or grade those papers. Are you grading the student? Are you grading the student's output from an AI system? And I think for the human condition, there's this sense of, have we lost control over these things, these processes, over these contexts? If you apply that in a small business, for example, you can see how employees may feel that decisions are increasingly made now by these algorithms that are based on probabilities and not on people. So there's almost this kind of reduced sense of worth in the organization. That can happen. I'm not sure it always happens. It depends on how your management interfaces with you. So creating feelings of helplessness, reduced autonomy, well, if the AI can do it, why my skill set, is that going to be of value in the next few years? Which comes to this point now. Whether you feel that your skills are obsolete, all right, outdated. Should I go back to university and learn something on AI? And that's usually the quickest response, Oh, I think we should learn something about AI. And we have to recognize that I don't think it's enough to just learn and develop skills in AI. We have to be very strategic and specific in terms of those types of skills. Like, for example, you think about the curriculum on AI. You have something as wide as designing AI systems to actually integrating AI systems into something like a digital platform. And so it's not that every skill is going to be relevant for you. You have to know exactly, let's say you're an accountant or you're a lawyer or you're a manufacturer of juices and so on. You have to look at the way your business is operating and see exactly where AI can fit in. And then you would be able to kind of match the kinds of skill sets and the kinds of courses or subjects that you may want to pursue. So it's not enough, I think. What I would say, though, and I think the only qualifier I would say is that I think everybody, like the same way we talk about general literacy, that you should have, you should be literate in terms of reading and writing. And, we're talking now about digital literacy. I think every digital literacy course should have an AI component to it. And I think every citizen of every country should be digitally literate. Same way that we talk about financial literacy and other types of literacy, I think that now is an absolute necessity. I don't think that is a luxury now. All right. Considering the statistic that I got, more than 90% of jobs require digital skills. And that's now. So imagine in the next 10 years, close to 100% of jobs requiring digital skills. And if you think also from the other side, there's a significant skills match, because right now, I can tell you globally, only 33%, this is a true a global statistic, 33% of the workforce is actually trained in at least one digital skill set. So that's something that to think about. In the Caribbean, I believe that's much larger, probably close to 50%. In the absence of actual scientific research, we can look at that a little bit more, a little bit deeper. But I think that's something that we have to really address very urgently. Okay, and then there's the interesting psychological impact, and this one is pretty contradictory, because if you look back, one of the positive psychological impacts of AI that I just presented was this reduced stress, because now AI is coming in and helping you, moving away your role from the repetitive and monotonous formats, and now you're able to take on better work or more strategic work. There's a flip side to this. There's a two-edged sword. There are opportunities, yes, for AI to remove stress, but there are also scenarios where AI can actually present greater stress by increasing pressure. Think about it, to constantly learn new technologies. Because here, what I just actually advanced to all of you is the fact that, we should be digitally literate. And you're saying to yourself, I just completed my master's. I just did this certificate. I just did this. And now you're telling me that I have to go and learn now this. And not only that, and here's the unfortunate thing about this whole reality is that the speed at which AI is evolving would say, and this is based on research, that in the next 3 years, what you've learned now, you may have to relearn, perhaps even in a shorter time horizon. And I think one of the ways perhaps how we can navigate that is to recognize that learning is a lifelong activity. As I was telling the group yesterday, you could be 100 years old, you will still be learning. I think there's no end to learning in life. And that's why we stress the concept of lifelong learning. You're always a student of life if you think about it. And I think it's sometimes a change or reframing of our mindset in terms of how we see development, individual and personal and professional development, especially. Okay. But there are other sources of stress with AI integration, fear of being left behind, concerns about performance monitoring through AI systems. I'm not sure if you're familiar, but there are a few companies, not sure if it's Amazon that I came across, but there was a few top tier companies in terms of those in the G12 countries that have been using AI to monitor performance. In fact, being part of that performance management system. And trade unions are coming out quite aggressively, especially where trade unions are present, because as you imagine, in many of those developed countries, they've done a pretty good job in isolating trade unions. And I mean, in Barbados, where we are still heavily unionized, you can see where the conversation about using an AI to do a performance assessment or performance appraisal, or even to make a decision about, whether you get a promotion and so on, can receive a lot of licks from not just the unions but workers themselves, because it's something that people will say, but this was never in my contract. I think we have to kind of navigate this very sensitively, very cautiously, because I know a lot of our labor laws, if you think about it, they don't naturally cover AI. What I think they've done a good job in terms of our labor laws is that they keep things very generic, so that if, let's say, there's a threat, that threat can be perhaps operationalized as a technological device that may, create a little bit of a problematic for workers. So I think that's something that we may have to revisit. I'm not a lawyer, but I think I would tell Dr. Holder perhaps we should probably consider a legally inspired presentation or legally informed presentation of AI. It would be good to look at the legal implications for businesses, especially when they're doing their contracts and they're integrating it across the HR system. And the operational system, what that would look like. Now, so we know that AI can negatively affect employee behavior in different ways. Now, one of the things that we've come across in the literature is that employees who overly rely on AI, over time, may stop thinking critically. And I want to show you how this is linked to pre-generative AI era. So, cell phones. The first time I had a cell phone, I was 18, 19. And in those days, we had the older cell phones. Older in the sense that these were, I can't remember the actual names, were CGM phones or so. But these were before we had, the BlackBerry. It's smartphones, yes.
Motorola.
Motorola's, yes. And the Nokias, remember those Nokias when you drop them? They always stand strong. You remember before cell phones, and this would be the older in the group. So not older, I know you're younger than that, but the ones who were very more cell phones, people remembered numbers better. I tell you, my grandmother, she could have remembered every number. Her friend, her colleague, she would call out number 424-6273. And even as a young child, remember phone numbers. But as smartphone emerged, think about it. If I ask you right now, I want you to tell me let's say it's your husband's or wife or brother, just one person from your contact. Just tell me what their number is. And you said, you know what? That's true. Because we became so dependent on going in the phone and just search for the contact and select. And we call the contact. We do it on WhatsApp, do a WhatsApp call. But if you think about it, that particular skill has dropped because it's now replaced. And it's the same concept with the outsourcing of our critical thinking now to an AI technology, where a lot of that critical thinking that we would have done, the heavy lifting, is important for building what we call the learning mechanisms in your brain. So how your brain works, as you know, is that there are parts of your brain that clearly are responsible for learning. And like those who go to the gym, you build your physical muscle, your body by, you're stretching and you're lifting weights and so on. Your brain develops these neural networks when you read an article. If you think about when you did studies at UWI or some university, you would have to go, you have to write and so on. You're actually pushing your brain to learn because your brain is exercising. Those neural networks are being formed. Now, effectively, all of what you've been doing, that heavy lifting now, you're passing on to a machine, to an AI tool. So what effectively happens, when you don't go to the gym for a long time, what happens to your muscles, right? So effectively, you lose a lot of that. So think about it. Go back and then say if you could write that essay. If you were doing it long enough, let's say you were copying stuff from AI, and you said, let's say, forget AI, let me just turn it off. I start writing. You start doubting yourself. And then you start there's this kind of anxiety that creeps in. And then you start opening the AI page and you start saying, let me answer AI question. And that's exactly what happens. We saw it with the calculators, where calculators came in, the electronic calculators, and people start forgetting how to subtract $50 from $100. You go to cashier and the cashier says, let me guess. Say, but that's $55. Okay. So a lot of those skills are going to be, if you think about it, are going to be at risk. The more you rely on AI to do the heavy lifting that you once did. Okay. So the other problem with over-reliance on AI, and this is something that we spoke about, the hallucinations, is when people accept AI-generated information as gospel. So there's no background or secondary verification that's done. You didn't ask AI to generate any links for you to double check or cross check because think about it, you're an employee. You have to get a report to your boss by end of day, EOD. And this is so important. You, over time, became so dependent on the AI generating, you didn't take time to review the work. So you're submitting these things, assuming that they're factual, and your boss is going to make some decisions on these particular outputs. All right. Then you have the kind of adjacent threat of reduced learning. So employees become very dependent on AI tools. There's less effort invested in developing expertise. So then there's no motivation for workers to say, I want to go and learn something because the AI can do it. They can give you. It's almost like a Santa Claus phenomenon. You go to Santa, you ask for it, and Santa gives you right down the chimney. There's a complacency that emerges as well. Workers may trust AI recommendations too much that they become complacent. So things like innovation and critical thinking, as I say, go through the front door, not even the back door. And it then becomes a problematic. The errors go unnoticed. And as you know, errors have a cumulative effect. The more errors, the more problems you have down the road. Imagine you have a full set of data that's based on all fabricated outputs, and you're making strategic reports on this, saying that things are going this direction and that direction, right? Withdrawal and resistance, okay? Some employees may avoid using AI. So this is the other side of the spectrum. So you might have a situation where you have employees who are anti-AI. So they refuse to integrate themselves. And of course, something like that, I think, is a far too right position, in the sense that, as people would tell you, if you go too far on the other side of the spectrum, it's just as deadly. And that becomes a problematic too, because the positive benefits that we spoke about, the things that we can really leverage in a kind of a favorable, productive way, a constructive way, we don't enjoy the benefits because we become this kind of complete resistors, because we find that the technology is problematic. It's going to be, we feel that the technology is going to be sentient at some point. It's something that we have to fight against. It's an enemy. So we make AI an antagonist or enemy that we have to fight against. And that's to me, that's an equally problematic position to take within the workplace as well. Right? Now, a very important subject I want to get into that's connected to all of this is this phenomenon that I came across only a few months ago, interestingly. And this phenomenon is referred to as the leadership employee divide. And what this effectively is that and this doesn't happen for every organization, but only, I would say, 3 out of 5 organizations based on the research. And what it shows is that there's a significant disconnect or gulf between executives, what we call senior management, in terms of the level of confidence that they enjoy when it comes to AI implementation. When you hear many executives and CEOs and COOs speaking about AI, they're speaking like if they have shares, oh, this is going to be so great and so on. But then what we found is that is kind of juxtaposed against more than half, is close, I think 60%, and this is a global study here, of employees who are at best apprehensive about this implementation. And what I think what the gulf or that disconnect is telling us is that there's a communication problem here. And it could be a messaging problem in the sense that, when you have something that is so, in your view, so powerful and so impactful and positive, but you don't know how to communicate it. You don't know how to promote it in a way that creates or facilitates the necessary buy-in. I think that's where the problem comes in. So I'm just going to give you some of the numbers here. So about 50% of employees worry about AI hallucinating. So this is where a lot of the sources of apprehension come from. So about 50% worry about AI hallucinating mistakes or creating cybersecurity risks. Because if you think about it, when you take your report, let's say you have a report that you normally would analyze, and you upload that report into a ChatGPT or Claude AI algorithm, what you effectively have done is expose your work to be breached in terms of confidentiality across the wider the wider system. All right, because that upload means that somebody coming after you, or some hacker can get into your data. And I know you would tell business managers this, even academics, but you don't just pull and push your work in there, because you don't know when you push it in there who has access to that said work. Because the same way that we've and this is long before AI, we've been victims of hackers and scammers, and we know of the cybersecurity vulnerability in the Caribbean, from the financial sector to even education, that we have to be very careful in terms of how we navigate this space. The other source of apprehension that we've seen is employees reporting AI-generated corporate communication feels less authentic. You ever read an email from a boss or coworker or supervisor, and it seems not like them? It seems kind of this mechanical, very glossy type of email, almost lacking any human features. Yep. Many people are using AI to generate emails. And I mean, there are benefits to that. I think where the downsides come is a lot of people are saying, but the authenticity, because when you have an email that comes to say and ask you, how are you doing? You're doing well, and how are things? And you get into the matter of business, but you realize all of that was AI generated. It kind of hits hard into the heart. Think about it. I give you a perfect example. Imagine you were courting, you were talking to a young lady, a young gentleman on WhatsApp, and you feel that something's happening, this is going well, only to realize that all of this was an artificial intelligence agent. And so the performative nature comes in, and you say to myself, but how much do I know, or how much of that was really authentic? It applies the same way. So you can see the kind of damaging, cascading effects that AI, especially if it's integrated, especially with very sensitive matters into the certain processes, how the impacts can be treated and interpreted, of course. Unclear governance and lack of transparency. I think employees are equally concerned about that. When you have, there's no, so, organizations bringing in the AI system, but there's no policy on the AI system. Very important. The lack of transparency. Let's say I'm applying for a job and I was accepted into the job or I was rejected. But that rejection might very well be inspired by AI generated activity. And the question is, should I, as an applicant, a job candidate, or even as an employee, if it's part of my performance assessment, should I not be privy to how AI was used in arriving at this decision? You see what I'm talking about when we talk about the legal implications and the ethical ones as such. So this heavy reliance on AI for both managerial and even motivational emails and activities can, if you think about it, can quietly degrade trust. And that's something that I want to get into very quickly here. So questions that you have to kind of address as managers. Can I trust the AI? Because these are questions that employees are asking as well. Can management trust AI? Can AI be fair? Who is accountable when AI makes mistakes? And to be quite frank, there's a particular code now. It's across the globe. There's a standard that AI cannot in any way be accountable for anything because it hasn't reached the threshold as a human being that can warrant accountability. So it still rests on the human agent for that accountability. So AI being transparent, employees understanding how decisions are made using AI, and ensuring that human oversight trumps and remains in place, all of those conditions culminate well to improve trust in organizations. And of course, the last point I did mention there is that employees who are involved, not on the receiving end, but who are involved in this implementation process, I think that's going to be key. All right, and we can see the downside here, where you feel that AI has more say than you, and decisions may appear fair and unexplained. And that's where trust actually declines. Okay. So I'm going to kind of segue into my final remarks here on some of the key tips that you can take forward. The first tip I would expand on this one is that AI is a powerful tool that can expand, it can increase, as the term says, augment your thinking, but it should never be used to replace it. Okay. Now, the phenomenon, for those who are familiar with the term cognitive offloading, if you're not familiar, let me explain. Cognitive offloading is where you allow any technology to do the heavy lifting when it comes to problem solving, critical thinking, memory, even retaining facts. So your brain is not the one now retaining memory, all right? Memory retention, you're leaving that for the AI. That's called cognitive offloading. And what that does is that it creates something called cognitive debt. Cognitive debt is that kind of forgetfulness that you probably experience. Let's say when somebody asks for your number or somebody else's number on your phone and you forget, okay, I got to go. That's a cognitive debt. So it's a debt because you've invested in the technology in a way, but the return doesn't come back to you in terms of making you smarter or more innovative, right? So we call that cognitive debt. All right. So my tip here is to think first before deploying the AI or leveraging AI. So if you're writing an email, see if you can still construct the email. You can use the AI to kind of restructure certain ideas and conduct certain analyses, but you have to be in the driver's seat, not the AI. Very important. So let me give you an example. So instead of asking ChatGPT, for many of you who probably have done so, write my project proposal, please. Try this. Review my project proposal and identify weaknesses. That's no different from if you had send me the same email and say, Professor Devonish, I want you to check over. Learning has not been supplanted because I would come back to you and I would give you these comments and say, well, you should change this. And you learn in the process. So you're using AI as that assistant rather than the driver in this seat. The second tip I have for you, keep humans responsible for final decisions. We've learned that AI can generate convincing but inaccurate information. So sometimes, many times, the AI can give you something and it comes across so convincing that it has to be true, but it's not. It's completely fabricated. And we know from studies, at least 1 in 3 outputs could very well be a hallucination. So I think it augurs, it benefits the human to remain in that driver's seat, to ensure that a human is the decision maker at the end of the day. All right. No important decision should be accepted solely because AI suggested it. So I'll give you an example. Let's say that you had 10 CVs, and for some reason you took those 10 CVs and asked one of the AI assistants, I want you to review these CVs and tell me who's the best so I can hire. I don't have time for this. And AI recommends rejecting a job applicant based on a resume screening. What I will tell you to do is to review the recommendation yourself. Assess the applicant independently and make the final judgment. Let that be your fight. What you can do is that you can submit your decisions, not the people's CVs, please, on the platform. I wouldn't want you to upload those personal devices on the platform, but allow the AI, take your decisions, tell them what you think, and see what if AI may very well point you to something that you've missed. That's fine. That's what an assistant does. All right. Tip 3, use AI to remove routine work, not human judgment. We know that AI is strongest at addressing repetitive tasks, and it is weakest at contextual understanding and human judgment. So focus AI on where it's actually can serve you best. All right. So things that you're what we call low value administrative tasks, not on relationship management. Don't use AI to kind of build relationship with customers because of the artificiality that comes out of it. Use it for things that usually are kind of hidden from the front-facing side of things. Now, it doesn't mean that you can't use it to support some of those front-facing activities, but you won't want to be the direct intervener of the same. All right. So things like scheduling meetings and probably doing a summary, what we normally would say a meeting minutes of a committee that you've been meeting in some time, drafting emails, but even so, add a bit of your human flair in the emails, please. Data cleaning. Now, these are examples of poor uses from research. So things like using AI to conduct a performance appraisal, employee performance appraisal, or conflict resolution. So you're asking AI, you have these 2 employees here and they're presenting these cases, tell me what the solution is. No. It's much more nuanced than that. It would require human intervention. Disciplinary decisions. And these are kind of what we call high value or high impact decisions. So we got to be careful here. Right? So those are important tips to take away. Tip 4, maintaining human connection. AI can improve efficiency, but should not, and it cannot replace empathy, emotional intelligence, or social support. Those are what we consider to be soft skills. Things that we ask our educational representatives or authority to infuse into our curricula because they're part of the human condition. And studies have shown that social support from human agents like supervisors and colleagues remains one of the strongest predictors of employee well-being. Because we have there's this appetite for human connection in the workplace that AI can never supplant. All right. So I think the key tips coming out of this is to protect opportunities for human interaction, allow them to be sacrosanct, is almost like, these are the non-negotiables. We wouldn't have AI in this space. And if you're going to use AI, perhaps you can use AI to generate other things. Like, for example, I remember we had an activity once and we wanted to do some questions. It was a quiz for staff. And we asked AI to generate some questions. But outside of that, that was it. We had it face-to-face, and staff were able to kind of generate something together, and it was, harmonious. All right. So you can use the AI for those types of mundane tasks, but don't use AI when it comes to high sensitive, subjects or subjects that require a lot more human touch. So, for example, delivering redundancies, communicating that your job is no longer relevant, we have to lay you off and so on, and you using AI for that, it can come across as a slap in the face for many employees at risk. We talk about conducting sensitive performance discussions. So you having a one-on-one with an employee because he or she is concerned that their performance score is not reflective of their work over the last 6 months or a year. All right. I think those conversations should not be reduced or relegated to an AI system. All right. Tip 5, I call this the setting of ethical guardrails. We know that boundaries exist in all walks of life, and I think AI is no different. I think we have to establish clear boundaries detailing what AI should be allowed to do in the workplace, whether it be handling data, and when AI use must pause to ensure that work does not bleed into constant round the clock productivity. And that can happen, you know. You can have a situation where because of the AI use, it means that you're working a little bit more, a little bit harder, a little bit more intense. You can have that line between work and life becoming quite blurred, if not removed completely. And those are things that you have to kind of put in as non-negotiables. So you have to keep humans accountable. You have to be able to verify at all times anything that is generated from an AI. It doesn't matter how sophisticated and convincing the AI is. Protect confidential data. Never upload sensitive employee or customer information into public AI systems. There are schools of AI systems that are private based, so they have cybersecurity protections. So you should find out about those. Those exist. So you would have them tied to company credentials and so on. And of course, monitoring bias, because AI, as you know, is not free from bias as anything in this world. I think transparency is a big move, very laudable move for managers. I think employees become suspicious, and I'm going to come to the close here now. Employees become suspicious when AI is making decisions without their knowledge. So I think when you're thinking about AI use, tell employees, disclose when AI is used, why it's used, and how decisions are made, and what safeguards exist. Okay. My final tip: continuously upskill. A major fear surrounding AI is job displacement. I think we know that. I think we have to take the next step to train ourselves to work with AI. I think managers and employers also have a role here to kind of support their staff in ensuring that they have the opportunities that they can leverage with AI. Okay. And I'm going to close off here with this last PowerPoint. And just to say that, and then close off with this last bullet here, the most successful organizations will not be those with the most AI. There will be those that best combine artificial intelligence with human intelligence. I think that's a good point to depart. But thank you so much, the SBA, for this invitation and platform. And I thank all of the participants. And I look forward to any questions.
All right. Thank you very much, Professor. Well, we are out of time. Unfortunately, we are unable to engage in our usual Q&A at this time. Some key takeaways. I mean, we had the tips coming at the end, which captured it all so nicely for us, that we want to remind ourselves to use AI for routine work and not human judgment. That's a key point. Use AI for routine work and not human judgment, because there was a question from one person about how can we use AI in our businesses to enhance productivity while still maintaining our own creativity and cognitive ability and so on. And I think that the information shared by our professor clearly answers that question for us. Some other takeaways. This is an age of digitalization, we agree, and therefore we must all be committed to digital literacy, as we are to financial literacy and all the other disciplines and areas of learning that we consider to be mandatory. Now, in this age, digital literacy is and ought to be mandatory. Appreciatively, there's a fear for any new technology, but as Devonish told us, the technology has no morality really. It is neutral and therefore dependent on how we use it in our day-to-day lives and our activities and our business. I personally took note of the point made that AI should be used as an assistant. Yes. So, the points about creativity and the fact that a lot of graphic designers now are feeling displaced, is a good point. But if you use AI as an assistant, Instead of telling it, well, go and design my flyer or go and design my video for me. No, you still, in my view, should use the professionals, and if anything, maybe use AI as an assistant to enhance, to navigate, to discuss with them, key aspects of the output that you want to see, but not resolve that you're going to rely completely on AI for your work. These are some key points, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, all that came out in this presentation today. Wow, lots of information shared. I hope, ladies and gentlemen, you found it very informative, very instructive. We want to thank you so much for spending a part of your day with us. This has been our final webinar for this financial year of the association. Members, that our financial year ends June 30th, and you can look out for other sessions coming from the month of July as we start a new round of webinars, a new round of information sessions. We look forward to bringing these to you and having you participate accordingly. So thanks again, colleagues, for sharing with us today. Professor Devonish, as usual, a pleasure having you on the call. Thanks for the research that was done and the presentation, which we will make available to our members and to our partners. We've been looking today, colleagues, at the psychology of AI in business, how artificial intelligence is changing business and human behavior. It has been our pleasure having you and hosting this platform today.
Thank you. Have a
Thank you
great day,
too.
everyone.
All right. God bless you all. Have a good day. See you on the next occasion. Bye-bye for now.